Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Ahmed Tareef, and I would like to welcome you to our family virtual majlis. And I am delighted to introduce to you that the third of our online majlis on ESG, environmental, social, and governance. This is our second ESG majlis involving international experts, and this evening presentation comes from global authorization in this area. I am very pleased to welcome Mr. Jacob and Mr. Hayden Morgan and Mr. James Dunham, and our host, Ms. Zoe Buckingham. Thank you for attending. And now I would like to hand over to Ms. Buckingham, who will chair that promises and to be highly informative and discussion. Ms. Zoe, the mic is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Al Tareef. It is a pleasure, as always, to host the Family Virtual Majlis for your esteemed family. In our previous ESG Majlis, we laid down the foundations for this topic, focusing on the legislation that every corporate and public sector organisation needs to consider. Our talk this evening, entitled The New World of Sustainable Business, takes an in-depth look at considerations for business and how best to implement ESG. So let's meet the team. This evening, we're delighted to welcome three individuals who are at the highest echelons of the sustainability sector: Hayden, Jacob, and James. And this is me. I'm an international marketing consultant, a commercial writer and a presenter, and I've worked across the Middle East, Europe, and North America. I work with clients in many areas, all business to business, mainly fintech, technology, law, professional education, and home entertainment. And my company produces all sorts of innovative campaigns which help clients to put their messaging across. I'm also a member of the Arab British Chamber of Commerce, which is a fabulous organisation and really helps to keep me up to date. I'd like to introduce you to Jacob, who has extensive international experience of leading complex structural reform within organisations, which have been very well received by partners, stakeholders, and shareholders. Before joining LR Consultants, Jacob was with Buckingham Refinery and Petrochemicals Industries Company Limited in Oman as project director and CEO of the Buckingham Refinery project. This experience included leading a successful team which delivered the financing of this multi-billion-dollar refinery project in the Middle East, and included in-depth negotiations with export credit agencies, commercial and Islamic banks, lenders, and their advisors. He represented the company on global platforms and worked with shareholders to deliver maximum value. Jacob is known for his drive, his determination, and excellence in relationship building with company seniors, boards, partners, government authorities, and external stakeholders. Welcome, Jacob. I'd also like to introduce Hayden Morgan, who's the director of Morgan Green Advisory. Hayden is an internationally recognized independent practitioner with almost 25 years experience advising on sustainability, ESG, and green aspects. Hayden was instrumental in the setup of the UK Green Investment Bank, the world's first green bank. Initially, it was owned by the UK government, and then it was sold to Macquarie for £2.3 billion, forming the Green Investment Group. As director, Hayden developed and implemented the institutional ESG framework, policy and processes at the bank, and worked with fund managers. He also led the Green Advisory Unit, winning the IEMA Impact Award for Sustainable Finance in 2020 and the Environmental Finance ESG Data Initiative 2020 for the GIG Carbon Score, or the Bloomberg NEF collaboration, rating over 60,000 assets globally. He's the global convener for the international ISO standard for sustainability, ISO 32210, and he's going to be talking about this in a minute. And Hayden leads experts from over 25 countries in developing the standard for financial organizations. Hayden advises the World Bank's Global Infrastructure Facility and is a fellow of the Institute of Environmental Management and Assessment. So welcome to you, Hayden. And sitting with Hayden is James Dunham, Associate Director of Morgan Green Advisory. James is an expert in physical climate risk management and adaptation finance and has supported governments, infrastructure owners and operators, and financial institutions for 12 years. James helps clients identify and manage physical climate risks to investment projects and portfolios. He finds climate change adaptation investment opportunities, and he builds institutional capacity to manage physical climate risk and disclosure to the most stringent international standards. In previous roles, James has advised the European Investment Bank on physical climate risk. He's co-author of the ISO standard 32210, which I mentioned a minute ago. So we have a really exciting panel, extremely high level, and I think we're going to get some great information from them today. So welcome to you all. Over to you, Hayden and James. Thank you.
Thank you, Zoe, and it's a real privilege for us to be talking to you today at your Family Majlis. So thank you very much for the invitation to speak. We're going to be focusing on sustainable finance and the role of ESG within that. So if we could just move to the next slide,
yes,
please Zoe. So a little bit of context around sustainable finance, and then introducing some of the key recent initiatives around integration of sustainability in the financial context. So we'll be talking around the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, the new ISO standard that Zoe mentioned in her introduction, and then a little bit about the Sustainable Finance Label for infrastructure projects. And then just to close out, some new developments, which was only published a couple of months ago, around the International Sustainability Standards Board, which is a new standard for pretty much all corporates globally around disclosure of performance for sustainability. So just before we get onto the detail, I just want to present high-level introduction as to Morgan Green Advisory. So you've already had the introductions of James and myself, so I won't go into that. But Morgan Green Advisory was set up about 18 months ago. We specialize in sustainable finance. So that's the integration of sustainability into financial considerations. We've got a mission to enable a sustainable, lower carbon future. We have got a few selected clients there. So it's from global, big sort of multilateral development banks, infrastructure fund managers, private equity, right through to NGOs as well, and including institutions like the European Commission. So we operate globally. And there's more available on our website if you want to see some of the more, some of our case studies and some of the other projects and clients that we support. Thank you, Zoe. So just kicking off in terms of some of the initiatives, if we could just move to the next slide, please. These are the four that I want to talk to. So these are some of the 4 global initiatives that are applicable for many organizations. So whilst these have sustainable finance as their key theme, they also will impact a lot in terms of corporates, raising finance, looking to get shareholder approval, and integrating into business activities, operations, products, and services. Just picking out a few, TCFD is probably the most recognized there. That is the Mark Carney and Mike Bloomberg-led initiative. The ISO standard is one that has been going for 3 years, which I'm the global convener for, and I've been leading 25 countries in developing this standard. So we'll talk about that. That's an organizational level standard. The fast infrastructure label is an asset specific standard. So it's slightly different, but again, that's been designed specifically to mobilize private investment into sustainable infrastructure projects. Then James will also talk about the new IFRS International Sustainability Standards Board, which has been set up, and there's a couple of consultation papers out there. So with that, I'll just hand over to James, who will talk us through, at the high level, the TCFD requirements. Thank you. James, over to you.
Thank you very much, Hayden, and a pleasure to be here today speaking to everyone on the call about sustainable finance and these standards. We wanted to start with TCFD, but it's important to note that these are comprehensive standards. There's a lot of detail behind them. What we're trying to do today is just give a flavour and highlight these standards and their considerations. So when we're thinking about TCFD, the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, we're talking about climate-related financial risk, and this can be broken down into two risk areas. So first of all, physical climate-related risk, and this is very much my area of expertise. And these are risks associated with the impacts of climate change, whether that's to do with chronic issues, so gradual changes in weather and climate and how they generate financially material risk to an organisation, or acute issues which are more associated with extreme events when we're thinking about heat waves and flooding. And it's important to recognise that climate change will generate financial impacts for many organisations, and these can be, and sort of financial impacts include impacts on revenue, expenditure, asset and liabilities, capital and financing. And then the other perspective of climate-related financial risk are transitional risks, and these are risks associated with the transition to a lower carbon economy. And these risks and also opportunities, and it's important to put it in that context as well, can be categorized as policy and legal, technology, market, and reputational risks and opportunities. Next slide, please, Zoe. And TCFD is very much about recognizing that these risks can be material to an organization, and organizations need to consider these and disclose how they're taking these risks into account when thinking about their operations, and to give confidence to the market that these organizations have identified the risks that are material to them and have put in place measures to manage those risks or realize the associated opportunities. And when thinking about this, the TCFD provides recommendations structured within 4 pillars. So thinking about governance, I think about strategy, risk management, metrics and targets. And it's important to note that as demonstrated by this diagram, these are concentric circles. These are complementary areas where an organization needs to think about their response to managing climate-related risks and disclose that the materiality of those risks, how they're being managed, to give confidence to investors and other stakeholders. Next slide, please. So TCFD integration, it's targeted at listed companies and larger companies, but I think many organisations now are seeing the benefits of not only disclosing in line with TCFD, but following the recommendations. And in the UK, for example, there's now mandatory disclosure for the larger businesses. And there's also, in addition to that, regulatory requirements to produce a transition plan or an adaptation plan, thinking about the context, whether that's dealing with transitional risk or thinking about physical climate risk. And this changing regulatory context is not isolated to the UK or even Europe. So Canada, for example, have announced to move towards mandating TCFD, and this is being picked up across the world as something that's important to do from a regulatory point of view. But as I said earlier, that companies are really seeing the benefits of doing this and communicating how they're identifying and addressing these risks. So when thinking about TCFD integration, it's very much about mainstreaming the consideration of climate-related risks into existing processes and procedures and disclosures, whether that's strategic or financial. And that's really cool. The TCFD is not just about disclosing what you're doing, it's about weaving the consideration of climate risk into where it's material, into processes and procedures and approaches, so that you can realise those benefits and and manage those associated risks. And that and the reason, the key drivers for this of not only disclosure but integrated risk management is for organisations is better access to capital, improved reputation and commercial relations, being prepared for the new regulatory environment as highlighted earlier, as well as better risk management, strategic planning, and also attracting new customers and clients. Next slide, please. So that's it from a TCFD's perspective. I wanted to now hand over to Hayden, who would talk us through the ISO standard 32210 on sustainable finance, which he was convener.
Thank you, James. And just to say, if you've got any comments or questions, we've had some already, feel free to add it to the chat. We do have a bit of time at the end of our presentation after Jacobs has also spoken for some Q&A. So very happy to address any questions. Like I say, but please use the chat function if anything occurs whilst we're talking. So in terms of an introduction to the ISO Sustainable Finance Standard, this is a brand new standard. It is scheduled to be published in November 2022, but it encompasses the integration of sustainability throughout organisations that impact with sustainable finance. So a lot of different financial organisations where that interfaces with sustainability. I won't call out everything, but you'll see some of the key products there. You'll see the capital flow in the middle, some of the enabling functions, stakeholders, and some of the infrastructure. So this is the scope of the new standard. Next slide, please. In terms of some of the aims of the actual standard itself, it will help at the organisational level around transition, how an organisation is contributing to a more sustainable, lower carbon economy and meeting its sustainability goals. Driving value, so potentially accessing new market opportunities, developing new products and opportunities and investment opportunities. It will help an organisation to become more sustainable and more profitable in the long term. It will help also mitigate risk and also identify opportunities. One of the key aspects is engagement with stakeholders to make sure that there is an alignment of interest between what stakeholders expect and what the organisation is doing in terms of activities, products and services. Next slide, please. It will also help with some cohesion. So there's a lot of emerging initiatives, especially in Europe, new regulation. It will help bring a lot of that together and provide a framework for implementation. It also provides good practice and what becomes international standard benchmarks for organisations to reference. It helps with transparency in terms of providing clarity around performance, and it will also maintain relevance. So there will be on the website, which will accompany the standard, a curated and dynamic reference database of a whole load of different initiatives and good practice that users of the standard can reference. Next slide, please. In terms of the contents, again, I won't go through the whole thing, but just to call out the principles, and you'll see there the key sustainable finance principles, and also at the bottom, implementation guidance. So they're the key aspects of this. The next slide just shows you the relationship of these key principles. They are subject to ongoing interaction and it is holistic. So these principles interrelate with each other. They're underpinned with continual improvement, and the outcomes or the aims is to achieve greater sustainability outcomes over time. This pulls together some of the key aspects around the principles. In the middle there is the organization's operations, activities, products and services. So it's around integration throughout the whole of the organization's activities there. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, it's to be published in November 2022. We've had input from over 25 countries globally to get that global consensus. So it is highly applicable to a lot of jurisdictions globally. And one of the benefits of ISO is it's consensus driven, and in many places it's provided sort of regulatory standards in absence of any strict compliance or financial supervisory oversight. So it's a really good reference, and I would definitely commend anyone that's interested in this to take a look at the standard when it's published. Next slide, please. So the other aspect I wanted to talk about is the Fast Infrastructure label. Now, this was actually launched at COP26 by the Chief Executive of HSBC, and it's a label that gets applied to projects, so infrastructure projects and assets, to demonstrate positive sustainability credentials. The whole idea is to attract more private sector investment into public infrastructure. And the way to do that is to provide the label to show that the asset is sustainable. Next slide, please. Fast Infrastructure itself is a public-private initiative. You'll see the founding partners there, but we've had a lot of input from global institutions, development finance, and regional players as well. So this is a true global collaboration, and it's also backed by some governments and sovereigns as well that you can see there. And throughout the development of this, over 80 global entities have inputted into the development of the actual label itself. So it's got a real good credentials. Next slide, please. The actual label itself has been endorsed by investors representing over $100 trillion of assets under management. So it's got significant endorsement already. You'll see some of the institutions there. The challenge we've got now is taking that endorsement and turning it into action. We hope to be announcing soon a new secretariat and data repository, which will pick up this work and help with that market engagement to get the label out into the market, and so it can be applied for projects. Next slide, please. Just a quick note on applying the label. There is a framework document. It took some inspiration from the Green Bond Principles and actually the Equator Principles that Jacobs is going to be talking through later. But it's got some 5 set requirements. One of the requirements is demonstration of a positive contribution against one of 14 criteria. And if the project satisfies all these criteria, it can be awarded the label. Next slide, please. These 14 criteria are divided between environmental, social, and governance, so ESG, plus climate adaptation and resilience. And all projects need to meet 14 criteria in terms of baseline requirements, but as I mentioned, the crucial aspect is a positive contribution against one or more of these criteria. Next slide, please. In order to map out the application of the label, there is this slide. I won't go through the detail. I think we're going to share these slides afterwards. So if need be, please take your time to go through this. But just to show that the label can be applied at any time, from feasibility and design right through to operations, and it interfaces with key stakeholders involved in the development of projects and assets and infrastructure development. And you'll see there the key label requirements is around this positive contribution and disclosure. Also, there is an external review which is strongly encouraged as well, so an independent third-party review to validate those disclosures. Next slide, please. With that, I'm just going to hand over to James. This is the final initiative we're going to be talking through. So James, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Hayden. So it's important to recognise there are a wealth of standards and guidance out there, and we've highlighted a few core ones, but there is work going on to really consolidate all these global reporting standards, and the International Sustainability Standards Board is demonstrating this, and they've produced draft guidance around disclosure for sustainability financial related information, as well as climate related disclosures, and that encompasses the work of the TCFD as well. So it's about bringing these reporting standards together, and also recognizing there's often complementary principles associated with them, and this work really is trying to make sense of that environment. Next slide, please. Specifically in relation to the sustainability related financial information guidance, so this draft is currently under consultation, and if you're interested, and there's that opportunity to contribute that, as well as start to digest the nature of the guidance. But it's around identifying what material issues are for your organisation from a sustainability perspective, and like I said before, think about risk and opportunities. And disclosing and offering guidance how to disclose that information alongside other reporting. Next slide, please. And then again, from a climate perspective, it's very much the same principles. So the ISO, Hayden was talking about the ISO standard earlier, that there's whether you're looking at sustainability as a whole and the ESG or climate, there is a lot of overlap and commonality between how these things are addressed. But this offers specific guidance related to climate-related financial risks and opportunities. And again, it's about looking at what the material issues for your organisation are, identifying those, managing them, and this offers guidance in terms of how you can disclose those as well. So the standards we've talked about today, these very much set the agenda, or will set the agenda for the next decade. But as I said, crucially, that there's a commonality between them. There's common principles that they follow, and it's really about integrating the consideration for sustainable development across your organisation, identifying what those material issues are for you, and putting processes in place to manage those. And by following these standards, it will not only help you align with evolving stakeholder expectations, but really demonstrate how your organisation is contributing to that transition to a low carbon, climate resilient and sustainable economy. So from Hayden and I, thank you very much for listening. We very much welcome any questions at the end of the session, and I'll like to hand back to Zoe.
Thank you so much. That was fascinating, Hayden and James. Really interesting to hear those standards mapped out, albeit briefly, but giving us so much information. Thank you. And now I'd like to hand over to Jacob. Jacob is going to talk about international project financing. Thank you, Jacob.
Thank you very much, Zoe, Hayden, James. And thank you for the opportunity given to us to present to this beautiful initiative. I'm going to talk a little bit about project financing and the changes that have occurred over the years. I remember some 20 years ago or so, you went to your friendly banker and you say, "Hey, Ahmed, I have a project for you, very profitable." So Ahmed said, "Okay, show me the figures." And indeed, without having much ado, but only based on the commerciality of the project, you were giving the project loan, whether it is even small or large, etc. Over the last years, of course, this whole landscape has dramatically changed, mainly due to the climate change, but also due to changes in the governance culture worldwide. So if you go to the first slide now. By the way, I forgot to put a slide on how important our company is and what we are doing, but people can see that on our website. Anyway, project finance nowadays is complicated. It's not something which can be done easily, but one of the big issues around project finance is really compliance with ESG. But of course, there are a lot more than just ESG. And I'd just like to give you a little bit background on what is all required for your project financing. If we go to the next slide. Over here is a list of 13 key elements.
Jacob, I think you are on mute, Jacob.
Yes, we lost you for a second there, Jacob.
Okay, then we try again.
Yes,
Okay,
would you like to talk through this slide again?
Okay. If you want to go, if you want to organize project finance, then these days a lot of different requirements are required from the lenders and from the financial institutions. You can see here on the right side 13 different key elements which are really required by the banks if you want to require a loan. And generally it's more than 50 million. You have to come up with those kind of details. And of course, environmental, social impact assessment, governance, all is a part of it. So, but it's not the only one, but it's becoming more and more important if you want to actually go for project finance. So to assess actually the ESG of projects, the lending institutes have in 2003 prepared a document which is called the Equator Principles, and it started in 2003. So if we go to the next slide, these Equator Principles are de facto the ESG global standards now, and it is important to note it's global. And as I mentioned, it started 2003 by 10 banks which said we're going to apply this. Since then, the adaptation, it is adopted by more than 100 EPFIs and in more than 40 countries. So it's really worldwide accepted. Besides, of course, the Equator Principle advisors, you need also a lot more advisors if you want to comply with the requirements of the Financial Institute for Banks. I just mentioned some here, but it's really very important that all are done in compliance with these international rules. If you go to the next slide, and we look at the Equator Principles by itself, there are 10 different principles. I don't want to go through all the ones in detail, but as you can see, on number 2 is very clearly mentioned environment and social impact assessment. I cannot tell you how important that is. And of course, also number 4, the environmental social management system are really key principles. Grievance mechanism, number 6, is important. Stakeholder engagement is important. But all of them are actually required by the banks. And if you, and by the financial institutes you are working with to get your finance approved. We go to the next slide. So a lot of people will say, but why is it is really important? I remember project managers telling me, listen, what do I have to do with it? This is only for our CFO and his team, and they will take care of it. Let me do my job. Actually, that is incorrect, because the principles go so deep there's requirements for the ESG in general go so deep into your project that during the planning, during your engineering, during your execution methodologies, as well as your contractors, they all have to be involved from the beginning. Because if they are not involved from the beginning, then you might have to do your work again and again and again, which will, and that is being required then from the financial institutes because you don't comply. And as a result, your project will have another delay and delay and delay. So it is really important that from day one, when you plan a project, you make sure that there are institutes, there are companies who support you in making sure that you are complying with all the requirements of the financing, and specifically also compliance with the Equator principles. I think it's very important to know that you cannot be too early start implementing that in your project designs. If you go to the next slide, what I've tried to put down here is a little bit is the different projects related finance or for which these principles are applicable. Of course, we have just the normal project finance and project related corporate loans, which are eligible for this kind of financing. You have refinancing, which is very important because in many occasions you want to refinance your project when you do the next one, the follow-up one. Of course, during acquisition financing as well as during bridge loan for project. So I'm not going to read through the whole thing. The slides will be made available. So if there are some questions on it, please, it's not only in the Q&A, but also later on where you can ask questions. If you go to the next slide, it's a little bit more how the borrowers look at the EP. They have divided it into three different groups. You have A, B, and C. Well, that's not something new. A, B, and C. The A is the high risk, B is the medium, and C is the low risk. But it's not just like that, because they also look based on the OECD rules that non high risk income of non-high income countries as well as non-AECD countries, they have a special status in it. So specifically, if you talk about the A and B sectors, for the C, it's all more or less the same. If you go to the next slide, I want to come back 1 second to this slide. It's really important to notice that just simple following the rules is not just it. It's really important that you comply and your best as possible, because it is really clear that if you do not comply, and that is agreed between all the participating countries, if you do not comply specifically with the Equator principles, there will be no loan given. It's as simple as that. So if it's not just let's do it tomorrow. No, it should be done immediately. Otherwise, you can forget your loan. Okay. If we go to the next slide, we talk about the latest changes in the Equator principle rules. This is the number 4, which is it was started in November, I think November last year, and it mainly addresses human rights and social risk, but it also very much addresses compliance with these rules with regard to climate change. So climate change is coming in there big time, and it's really of very important that this is adhered to 100%. I cannot not say that enough. It's not luxury anymore, it is compliance. Okay, if we go then to the last slide, the main takeaways of 4. It's, as I said, it's a significant change from the earlier ones. It really makes changes with regards to these 2 elements I mentioned, but also other ones. It also looks at the reputational risk, which is becoming more and more important. And then, of course, it gives investors, let me say, a high standard, a sustainable standard. And of course, there is guidance all over the principles on what to comply with. So, if we go a little bit further on the slides, I will show you a picture. The next one. I will show you a picture where we received. Your truly is in the center there, where we received an award from the PFI for the best, the world best finance in the energy sector in 2019. We got that because we really try to comply as much as possible with all the elements, and specifically also in a very early stage with the ESG. For example, to give you an example, our ESG team was from the beginning on very much talking to the local population, involving them in the project, try to create the ownership of the local population where the project was built in Buckingham, and by involving them from the beginning, we were sure that when the financial institutes sent their team to check on our implementation of the Equator principles, and we made sure that this was the best, and it was not just because of the Equator principle. It's just a very good example we gave there by in the beginning involving the people around your facility, what you're going to build. I was also very much involved in the late 90s and early 2000s with a project financed by the World Bank and the EBRD in the Caspian Sea. And there was only lip service given at that time to the request of the local population. Of course, after a number of years, when they start the implementation of your project, you get already from the local population issues, because you are not complying with what they consider as normal information and ownership of a project by a community. So I've seen the 2 different things, what we are doing today and what we did in the late 90s. And what we are doing today will definitely benefit to your project, the ESG, and specifically also on the ESG principles, and of course the Equator principles. So that's it. Any questions, please feel free to ask them. Otherwise, again, look at our website or contact Zoe, and I'm sure she will know, she knows where to find us. Thank you very much for the opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jacob. That was absolutely fascinating. Wonderful. Well, we have some questions coming in, so I'm going to move straight to Marissa Aladad, who's asked, I think, a very, very important question. She says, beyond the transparent assessment, management and reporting, what should be the stance of various stakeholders and financial institutions on hard to abate industries such as steel manufacturing, cement production and chemical plants, especially in this region? How public policy intervention and private sector investment can combine to push heavy emitters towards low carbon innovation and sustainable transformation? That last bit was a question. So how can public policy intervention and the private sector investment encourage the right kind of innovation? Is that something that you could help us with, Jacob?
I will try. Again, I believe that the OECD, which is the global organization, where many countries are a member, they have specific rules already. And many countries in the Middle East are also underwriting the rules of the OECD. I think it has to do now with the application of these rules in the investments which will take in this part of the world. Just to let you know, we are at the moment starting an advisory on a steel plant in the Middle East, and the Equator Principle will be a part of it. We will be working, of course, with the ECAs on this, with a number of ECAs, export credit agencies on it, but the company we are being engaged with, they have realized that they have to start this whole journey very early, and that importance need to go to all the different companies who want to go for sustainable project investments. But again, it's being ruled by the OECD, and I think, and to my knowledge, a lot of the countries in the Middle East, they have underwritten the OECD rules. Thank you. You're on mute. Zoe, you're on mute.
Thank you. I was just looking for the button. Thank you, Jacob. Yes, that was a very comprehensive answer. Thank you so much. Very interesting. And I believe that Afnan Saleh has a question.
Yes.
Afnan.
Yeah.
Who would you like to ask the question of?
I'll just raise my question, and the team may just go ahead and answer. First of all, thank you everyone. Thanks for the team. That was valuable information presented on sustainability, ESG, and a lot of new pile of information coming towards us. We at BISB, we started reporting on ESG in 2020, and we managed to enhance the reporting and the product delivery, and we also managed to enhance the scoring itself. So maybe being a Sharia compliant bank, that we are in compliance with the AOF standards, which is in line with the ESG standards, and they work parallel. That helps us in putting things in place and to report. So this year also we reported on GRIs. We reported also on materiality assessments. So talking about materiality, lots of words coming here and there. First, we talk about material topics, materiality assessment. Now there is a talk about dynamic and double materiality. I'd like to know more about those two things and what the difference between them, please.
Who would like to answer that? Would that be Jacob again?
Yes.
If you'd like to unmute, thank you, Jacob.
I'm going to kick this to one of the experts, which is in my team, who may be able to answer it better than me. I know a little bit about it, and indeed, you have the double and you have the dynamic materiality, etc. So, Vishnu, can you please answer it in detail?
Yeah, well, very much in brief, I can answer this. So double materiality focuses on two aspects: how the external environment affects the business. So how, let's say, the environmental and social aspects affects a business. Yeah, and also you're looking at that's you could categorize that as financial materiality. Yeah. And then you look at materiality in terms of how your business is affecting the outside world. So let's talk about how your business is affecting the environment and social communities. So that's impact materiality. So when you look at these two angles, club it together, that's double materiality. Now, talking about dynamic materiality, it's about something that is changing over time. Because when you prioritize material topics year on year, what is material to you today may be different tomorrow. So this is more on dynamic materiality. Yeah. So this is an approach broadly being followed. I have seen by companies. It's topic materiality. It changes over time. So that's what you talk about dynamic materiality. But I think Hayden would be the right person, because I've seen him talk a lot about materiality, and this is an important topic to address. So Hayden, if you're out there, I would like to listen to you as well on this.
Thank you, Hayden. If you could just give us your thoughts on that too.
Yeah, thanks, Zoe, and thanks, Vishnu. It's a really interesting topic, actually, this. And funny enough, last week I was in Portugal hosting one of the working groups for the new standard, Sustainable Finance Standard, and it took up a whole session of our meeting around definitions of materiality. And this is getting a lot of consideration because, as you mentioned, double materiality, which Vishnu very, very nicely explained there, is now a requirement for certain, especially in the European Union, considerations around disclosure of material aspects. And it's also a requirement under the new consultation for the International Sustainability Standards Board that we touched on as well. And just to add to what Vishnu mentioned around the dynamic materiality, there will be a requirement to consider future scenarios of materiality, potential impacts of external considerations on your business and your business's impact on the environment. So that double materiality, but over time. So that's a dynamic aspect of it as well. So that's why it's quite a complex aspect to consider. You've got multiple sort of receptors in the environment and social receptors to consider over a time period. So and you've got to assume different sort of set assumptions for your impacts over that time period as well. So that's why it's quite complex. GRI was mentioned also. So GRI is going to get wrapped into the International Sustainability Standards Board considerations. So over time, GRI will be retired. And that level of that sort of consideration of materiality will feed into those considerations as well. So I think it's a really important thing to consider. And there's different frameworks and different tools and approaches you can use to show how you have considered materiality. The crucial aspect is being transparent in your assumptions and transparent in how you've derived what is material to your operations or your business or your investments or your project. The key to it is transparency. But yeah, and also just to come back to one of the other questions around how to abate. I was going to come in on that one because this is a really interesting aspect as well, because around steel, cement, chemicals, these sort of activities are going to require, a transition plan over decades, basically. It will require a mixture of public policy support, private sector investment, we will probably be looking at things like a carbon tax and a border adjustment that will be set up by the World Trade Organization. These discussions are painfully slow, and considering 200 countries around the world need to agree this sort of thing, it's very difficult to get any consensus. But there is early talk around having this carbon tax, or potentially some form of cap and trade. A lot of these industries are already covered by some form of cap and trade. So what I mean by that is you get given an allocation of tons of carbon that you are permitted to emit. Anything above that, you need to buy credits on a market in order to make those emissions. So this is, I think, an interesting way forward. We're probably going to be looking at things like carbon capture and storage of stack emissions. We're also going to be thinking in terms of probably injection and carbon sequestration into things like old oil fields and gas fields, which of course in the Gulf region is highly relevant. We could also be seeing, like we are in Northern Europe, carbon dioxide being liquefied and then transported back to the former production facilities to be re-injected back into the sort of oil producing aquifers or whatnot, and gas domes and things like that. So it's a really interesting one. I think technology will be really helpful here, but it does need to be framed in terms of research, development, innovation, but with a lot of public support for that private investment. So it's a really tricky one to resolve. The other thing around technology is potentially the role of hydrogen in some of these as a fuel for steel, cement, chemicals. I think hydrogen, it's not going to be a single sort of a silver bullet, but it will be part of the mix. And I think it's that transition over time that is really important here, rather than a quick resolution to a lot of this stuff. Thank you.
Thank you so much. What an interesting question.
I'd like to mention something on this.
Yes, of course, Jacob.
If you allow me. And it's true what Hayden is saying about the carbon, etc. And it's not just talk what is happening, there's actually also action there. For example, we are the project managers for a project called Antwerp at Sea, where all the big industries like Total, BASF, Borealis, Ineos, Exxon, etc., they all were clustered together. And we have been managing that group to come up with a carbon capture and utilization project, which we are now in the FEED process. So we have really seen that supported by subsidies from the EU as well as from the Flemish government, we have seen that action is being taken, and also, of course, private contribution from the companies I mentioned is also being spent now. So the re-injection will indeed, what Hayden has already mentioned, will indeed take place in most likely in old oil fields in the North Sea. And at this moment, they have started already building specific ships to transport these liquids CO2 to the North Sea into facilities for re-injection. So there are about 4 or 5 projects in the world which actually are project financed, where the requirements are to take care of the CO2 at this very moment. So it's not just talk, it's actually happening.
That's absolutely wonderful and very cheering to hear that it's got that far. Thanks for sharing that story. Ali Al Tareef, I think you have a question.
Yes, Zoe, thank you very much. And thank you, everybody, for participating in this wonderful family virtual majlis. Actually, I have one statement and one question, so I give the floor for others also to ask. My first statement is that about the Equator principle. In Bahrain here, we have a bank, one bank only, which is the first in the Middle East to be a signatory to the Equator principles in May 2011. As you know, we are in May 2022. So 11 years ago, I guess, they have signed to this Equator principle, and they were the first. Today, as we speak, we have 131 signatory to the EP standards, and they are considered number 63 in their ranking, number 63 in terms of because they've done it 11 years ago. So this is a statement that Bahrain is no stranger to the Equator principles. Number two, my question, if I may ask, since you're touching on sustainable finance and sustainable assets and all of that, and this is very close to my heart. So I would like to ask our experts, what do you think of financial institutions trying to have sustainable assets by selling their unsustainable assets to other banks or to other nations, or just to put it in another perspective, like for example, American factories, they've been moved to third world countries in the maybe early 70s or 80s. So you are moving it from your jurisdiction or your country to other countries, but how are you helping the environment? So it's the environment, the planet Earth is one, whether you take it to the east or the west. Yeah, so I just want to know, what do you feel about this and how can we solve it? I read some papers here and there that you need to go down to these clients and try to help them to go green and not to shuffle them here and there. You need to do it yourself. But I see that financial institutions are not doing that. They are looking at the easy exit. That's my question. Thank you very much.
Thank you there, Ali. Yes, an excellent question. There's a lot of that kind of thing going on. Hayden and perhaps some of the others could answer this. Hayden, do you think you and James could answer this?
Yeah, sure. No, it is a great question, and it is a real challenge, and one that is, really tricky to actually give a definitive answer on. But certainly, just by selling carbon-intensive assets and lowering the intensity of your investment portfolio is not actually going to change any global emissions in terms of gross emissions, because those assets are still polluting. I guess the practice that we would sort of recommend is try to engage with portfolio companies and the higher emitters to try to have some form of transition plan along the lines of what we were discussing earlier around sort of trying to decarbonize some of these emissions. And if management are then not amenable to that sort of approach, and you've had a number of years of discussing this, and they are resistant to transition plans, is then to think about divestment, because having assets on the balance sheet which are resistant to change and resistant to thinking about transitioning is maybe not one that you want to have on your on your books. So that's the sort of approach that we have seen. Most portfolio companies and managers of these sort of assets are aware of what the sort of plans are for good practice for transition, and typically will be engaged, because they need that access to finance, they need a good credit rating, they need their stakeholders to be aligned. So I think it's that engagement before divestment is perhaps the best approach. Thanks.
Thank you, Hayden. Yes, thanks for answering that. It's such an important area, isn't it? We've had a question from Andrew. Andrew has been asking what will happen to SASB and TCFD Will they be retired with ISSB? And in actual fact, I'd like to ask Marianne Andre Lizuka if she could answer that. Would you like to unmute yourself, Marianne? And also tell us which company you're with.
Oh, sorry. Well, I'm working with Vishnu at LR, and I'm a researcher. I'm working in France. So, no, I'd just like to answer the question. Actually, in France and mainly in Europe, we are asking companies to work through an ACV process. ACV is analysis of the life cycle of your products or services, which means we will stop to sell our assets over there because we will work on the pollution, on the sustainability towards the whole process. And this is what we're asking now when we are doing any kind of investment process through a company, whatever the company is, if it's under stock exchange or not. So yes, we're working on it. But I had a question. How do you think that we can cope with sustainable finance and Islamic finance?
That's an interesting question. And I think it would be interesting actually to hear Mr. Ali Al Tareef's view on that. Mr. Al Tareef. And please bring in anyone in the audience that you think might have a view on this.
Thank you very much for this question. I would like to answer it, but before answering, I think we have with us here Mrs. Marine Bannerman, who is the CEO of APM Terminal Bahrain. Maybe if she wants to ask a question, she's most welcome. About sustainable finance, really this is a new concept for our Islamic banks. We have not seen any local bank as of now going for that, but GFH, which is GFH Financial Group, they have issued 900 billion green sukuk lately for their infrastructure project. This is something new to our market. We are still studying how they've done it. It is, I think, listed in London Stock Exchange. So I'm sure that in the future, more and more institutions we will be going that direction. Number two, also, we have seen that National Bank of Bahrain, they have obtained approval from their General Assembly for $700 million. It will be in different packages. I assume that one of these packages will be also green finance or something like that. So the future is bright about sustainable finance. It is the talk of the town. In the region, I think UAE is louder than all the region about it. And we are hopeful that this will spread around. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Actually, Mr. Al Tareef, perhaps you could also say what your perspective is on the convergence of the European legislation that's coming in and perhaps some of the more Western standards with what's happening in the GCC region. And perhaps Hayden as well, or James might be able to contribute to this. I know that you have your colleague Vishnu located in the UAE. Mr. Al Tareef.
Yes, thank you again, Zoe. Actually, in our region, can you hear me? Sorry.
Yes, we can hear you. Thank you.
Okay, welcome. In our region, sustainability and ESG, with all the frameworks, we have like in our Bahrain board 7 different frameworks that they adopt, but the most famous one is GRI. So our sustainability guide by Bahrain Bourse was issued in June 2020. So that's 2 years ago from now. And in the first year, we got something like 30% of the listed companies, they have adopted whatever was in that sustainability guide. It was on a voluntary basis, and it had 32 different indicators, 10 for the environment, 12 for social, and 10 for the governance. So total was 32. But in UAE, they started ahead of us. They started in 2011. about that. So there is a 9 years lag between us and our very close neighbor. I believe, in my own perspective, that ESG and sustainability, it's very, very important, and it cannot be given at the choice of institutions, whether listed or not listed, because they are playing with our lives, they're playing with our health, they're playing with our environment, and that's all what we have. So I believe that it should not be principle-based, it should be law-based. The regulators should enforce it on all the players in its markets, and all regulators should come to common grounds. And that's what we're seeing. And I'm sure it is coming from Europe towards our region very fast. And I leave the floor for the expert to elaborate more.
Thank you, Mr. Tareef. Hayden, do you have, can you tell us a little bit more based on your experiences of working in the GCC region? How are all these standards coming together in a way that financial institutions and other organizations can provide a kind of coherent response?
Sure. Yeah, I can also talk a little bit about the work that we're doing with the Islamic Development Bank, actually, which is integrating an ESG framework for them and looking at climate risk as well. And you probably are aware that they've got quite a big program on green sukuk bonds. And certainly our work that we've done with that institution, there's a lot of complementarity between the sukuk bonds and the Sharia sort of financing. It goes hand in hand with a lot of the ESG principles. So we see a lot of cohesion around that, and there's certainly not anything that we've seen that conflicts with that approach at all. So there's definitely a lot of alignment there, and in that work we are introducing a lot of the principles that we've discussed and we presented today, actually. So and again, they've been very well received, and I think to the point that was made around, it may be that there's not maybe a financial regulator in the region with the sort of teeth or maybe even the capacity or capability to regulate a lot of this sort of ESG or sustainable finance from a compliance perspective. But these sort of principles and good practice approaches can start to be implemented by institutions in the region and start to look at global integration of global good practice in our operations. And certainly the ISO standard, as I mentioned, is used in lieu of local regulation. So that is often used as a sort of benchmark for organizations to demonstrate good practice and transparency. And so if you don't mind, there was a question earlier, I think that Andrew flagged that he's also said, can we answer? But I'm actually going to if you don't mind, hand over to James on that one.
Yes, that's right. Andrew, would you like to unmute yourself and ask your other question? Oh, he's gone very quiet. He's gone very quiet. Never mind. We do have another question from Marianne, actually. Marianne, would you like to unmute? I believe
Andrew's mic is not working, but he was asking about if there are other changes to be made to or reduced with certain regulations. Perhaps you remember. Nobody answered that. I'm sure Hayden will be able to do so.
Thank you, Hayden.
Sorry, so James, as Hayden suggested, I can answer that. And so SASB will be consolidated within the ISSB. The TCFD, right? The TCFD is a framework in itself, and as we mentioned earlier, there's regulation behind that. But the TCFD Secretariat, the Climate Disclosure Standard Board, will be consolidated within the ISSB, and the TCFD very much supports and complements that wider work. So SASB, yes, TCFD itself is still its own important initiative, but very much complementary, and the principles are completely aligned.
Thank you, James. And Marianne, I understand that you have a question for Hayden. This is Marianne Andre Lezuka again. You just need to unmute yourself, Marianne.
It's okay.
Yes, it's
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, and I just would like to make a point now. In Europe, we're working a lot about greenwashing, which is really a key point, because we've noticed that many companies, financial companies and companies, are having wonderful and great reports, extra financial reports, impact reports, but the real fact is that there's nothing behind. And this is something we're really fighting against through the new sustainable finance industry in Europe. And this is why Europe is planning to do a specific label, what we call a label over there, which will specifically fight against that. But really, in the meantime, I see that in my area, in banking area, many people are not trained about sustainable finance. They have no clue of what's going on. And if our people are not trained and have no idea of what we're talking about, well, I guess it's not going to move on the right way. So I was very happy to come tonight because I'm very much interested to see what's going on in the GCC in this topic. But I don't really understand why it would be interesting for GCC to comply to our rules, which are very different from the ways they're working in their countries, you know. So what I heard tonight is that we're talking about our countries, but how can it fit with the GCC's way and banking ways of work of you know, how we work in the GCC is completely different. And I worked many times with Islamic finance banks, and I don't see how it can cope, you see. So this is the main question. How can we move in GCC IFRS regulations? How can we move to ISO in the GCC? How will it work, really?
Thank you, Marianne. I think that's a great question. The implementation and the bringing together of standards in very different cultures is interesting, especially when some people have started at different times, haven't they? Hayden and James, what are your views on this? Because you do obviously have your colleague Vishnu in the UAE, and I'm sure have been working with GCC countries.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for the question. I think there's a few concepts there you raised, Marianne, in terms of the risk of greenwashing, capacity building, and lack of sort of, I guess, understanding maybe in some institutional respects, and you know, application of standards designed for one jurisdiction on another jurisdiction. I would just respond to that by just underlining a lot of the initiatives that James and I specifically showcased today are globally applicable, and they're not necessarily European Union type standards being designed for application in the GCC. So certainly the ISO standard, the principles can be applied at the organizational institutional level to avoid greenwashing, to demonstrate positive contribution and transition. I will underline that word transition, because it is all about transition, especially in a region which is underpinned by a lot of, you know, oil and gas and heavy industry. That transition is so critical and important. But there is a fair bit of capacity and knowledge sharing that's required. And that greenwashing element, I think there is also a risk of inadvertent greenwashing. So there's deliberate greenwashing, which is deliberately overstating your green performance, your green credentials, your ESG performance. But there's inadvertent greenwashing, which is you know, just not paying full and due regard to the key global best practice and scientific principles to be applied for environmental and social impact. But also recognizing that many institutions are just at the start of this process. And the word journey is also bandied around a fair bit. This is a multi-dimensional sort of transition over decades. And it will require a huge amount of effort over the course of that time period. And it's nothing that can be solved in the next 5 years. But it will affect and impact every single institution and every single client and every single loan that gets made from now over the course of the next few decades should start to consider this. And I say should start to consider. So it doesn't need to, organizations don't need to be, they need to be aware of some of these emerging initiatives, but don't feel overwhelmed by it, because there is a lot that can be done in the small sort of baby steps. So that's how we respond to that, Marianne. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Hayden. And I guess I just wanted to finish really by asking you both about how organizations should structure their response to this in terms of their recruitment and their training. And there are obviously qualifications that are beginning to emerge. How big do these departments need to be, or that are actually going to handle this, or is it best in the hands of external experts? What's your view on that?
Yeah.
I think it's a mixture of both. It does need to be owned by the institution, but using scientific best practice and experts, as Andrew has flagged there, to support that. But the internal growth of capacity and institutional knowledge needs to go hand in hand with expert advice effectively. So yeah, it's a mixture of both. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Well, I wanted to thank all our speakers who've given us so much input and given us so much to think about. And as discussed, we will be able to share the slides with you. The video of this talk will be available as well, and we can share that with you. So do look at our LinkedIn page, company page, it will have all of the information on it and all of the links, or contact any of the people that you know who are involved with the Al Tareef Majlis. These are all our contact details. We're all very happy to hear from you and to get your thoughts on this event and the others run by the Al Tareef Majlis. And so thank you so much for your time. Thank you for listening. Thank you for the great questions. And we do wish you a very good evening and a good continuation of your ESG efforts. So good evening to everybody and enjoy the rest of your night. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well organized. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And I wish you all the best, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, Mr. Al Tareef.
Thank you. Goodbye.
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 Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye.